Southeast Asia is the world's most populous Muslim region, but scholars have given little attention to Islamic architecture in this region. Existing studies are often focused on North Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean, where Islam first flourished in the 7th century. In most books that refer to Islamic architectural history, see, for example, Craswell, Mitchell, Hillenbrand, and Hall, Islamic architecture in Southeast Asia is excluded. Michel begins his book with an impressive map of the Islamic heartlands to capture readers' attention and to provide a quick overview of how Islam has spread across the globe. Unfortunately, however, this overview does not include Southeast Asia. Nowhere in the Quran can we find a guidance of how should a mosque design be. Neither is in Hadith. What we find are religious practices and the special practices of Islam. So, for example, there is no regulation of how should a prayer space for men and women in the mosque, but Hadith does mention the recommendation of prayer lines for men and women. As a result, there are lots of interpretations of the space, not to mention the architecture of the mosques. Khalaf and Han say that the mosque is a culture-bound place of worship. The mosque reflects the local interpretation of Islamic law. It contains cultural identity and cultural characteristics, or what Weber defined as the overlay of the local characters. So how are these local characters represented by the mosque architecture in Indonesia, and how the social meanings are inserted and embedded in the mosque architecture? As is the case in other parts of the Islamic world, Islam in Southeast Asia has undergone dynamic development by which discourses and interpretations of Islamic law are not monolithic. Mosques, as venues where Islamic teachings take place, are at the center of debates, and oftentimes they go through negotiations or become battlegrounds of the competing discourses among authority holders, community members, and later on, architects as well. We will look at the traditional spatial arrangements, where Islam as an important religion subtly assimilated with the pre-existing local cultures. I will begin with an explanation of how Islam spread in Indonesia. Unlike in other parts of the world where Islam was introduced through military conquest, Islam spread throughout Southeast Asia, mostly through social interactions and the conversion of elites. Islam began to enter Southeast Asia in the 13th century in Aceh and Malacca. It was spread by Indian Muslim traders who then married locals and became permanent residents. From there, Islam spread eastward to the rest of the archipelago, reaching Java in the first half of the 15th century. The spread of Islam to the region has contributed to the disruption of the pre-existing Hindu kingdom in Java. The establishment of Islam in Java is historically attributed to the legendary Wali Songo, or the Nine Saints, who lived during the 15th and 16th centuries. Serving as the Sultan's religious advisors, they played a significant role in proselytizing Islam to the Javanese people, most of whom were adherents of Kejawen, which is a traditional mystical Javanese derived from Hindu-Buddhist ethical and spiritual values. The Wali Songo established Islam by employing conformist ways of incorporating the pre-existing customs into the newly introduced religion. Here we can find the cultural syncretism embodied even in the spatial constellation of traditional cities in Indonesia. We can see this pattern in cities like Yogyakarta, Surakarta, Demak, and other cities outside of Java Island. The traditional pattern has been existing long before Islam penetrated the archipelago. The original constellation consisted of the city square at the center, the palace, residentials, and temple to the west of the city square. Under the Islamic kingdom, this constellation is preserved with a modification in which the mosque replaces the temple. Here, the mosque is inserted into the traditional cosmological orientation that lies according to the north-south axis or mountain-ocean orientation. The Kraton or palace represents the government, market represents the economic system, the mosque represents the religious life. The residential represents people or the community, and the alun-alun or city square represents democracy because it is the place where the people communicated with their king or sultan. The insertion of the mosque into this spatial arrangement, which the locals have been long familiar with, shows a kind of negotiation, not only of how to integrate a new religion into the pre-existing spatial tradition, but also a negotiation to preserve the pre-existing religion and culture. The oldest Southeast Asian mosques demonstrate the cultural syncretism of Islam, as well as the Hindu and Buddhist spatial traditions that were already in place. These mosques were mostly built by Muslim rulers as they established an Islamic kingdom. Masjid Agung Demak, erected as the state mosque of Demak Sultanate, is one of the oldest surviving mosques in Southeast Asia and the great congregational mosque of the city of Demak today. Founded by the nine saints, the mosque marked the visually embodied religion, cultural syncretism in the early establishment of Islam in Java. Being a tangible monument that serves as a sacred site of power, as cited in the Java Tingkir Chronicle, the majestic mosque was meant to be what Nancy Florida calls as an enduring legacy of kingship in Java. More importantly, its construction also marked the negotiation of the Javanese spiritual orientation from a mountain, which is believed by Hindus to be a consecrated site, toward Mecca, where Islamic prayer is oriented. This was done by aligning the building per the prescribed Qibla orientation. A mythical story found in the Chronicle of Java Tingkir reveals that the mosque refused to orient toward Mecca until the saints asked it to do so. This refusal should be seen as more than a mere issue of direction and spatial orientation, but as a display of disobedience to the newly Islamic ideological power that had begun to penetrate Java and incrementally replaced the pre-existing Hindu tradition at that time. The construction of Masjid Agung Demak as part of Demak Sultanate's center of authority became an important archetype for mosques that were subsequently built by other Javanese sultanates and communities. The early Javanese mosques in Indonesia have a distinct architecture characterized by a square plan, a veranda, a raised platform, an enclosed courtyard, and a multi-tiered pyramidal roof, all of which can be seen in the pre-Islamic Hindu religious architectural tradition in the region. Most of the mosques were also characterized by the inclusion of a women's prayer room positioned to the side of the main prayer hall. The Javanese mosque style was probably derived from the pre-existing religious architecture that had been familiar to the local people. The early Javanese mosque architecture resembles the Hindu Javanese temples in terms of its spatial sequence, floor leveling, forms, and ornaments. The representation of the Sultan as the highest authority holder in the Sultanate state mosque was evident in the spatial configuration of the Sultan capital, where the mosque, the city square, and the Sultanate palace were essential parts. Being declared the Sultanate State Mosque of the Yogyakarta Sultanate, Masjid Gede Kauman clearly represents the Sultan's religious authority as a ruler of an Islamic kingdom. The Sultanate Mosque also remind people of Islamic values through their architecture. The three-tiered roof of Masjid Gede Kauman symbolizes the three stages of achieving perfection in Islam: hakikat or truth, syariat or law, and ma'rifat, knowledge. The middle crown on the top of the roof symbolizes God's oneness and Muslims as the privileged humans. Christians shows that these embedded values were taught unquestionably by word of mouth from generation to generation. In this sense, the Sultanate Mosque were not only a place of worship that accommodate the vertical relationship between humans and God, but also social places that facilitated relationships between humans. They also proselytizing Islamic values. We can find this inscription at main entrance of the mosque compound. It mentions the Sultan as the owner of the mosque. The ownership is also obvious in the use of the Sultanate logo in the clock attached to the wall of the entrance gallery. Entering the main prayer hall of the mosque, there are three essential elements: the mihrab for the prayer leader, the minbar for the preacher, and the maksura. It is a box reserved for the Sultan's prayer that is placed on the front prayer row inside the main prayer hall. The mihrab and the minbar are commonly found in any mosque, but maksura is only found in a Sultanate mosque. In the past, the Sultan always visited the mosque on Friday, once every 5 weeks. During his visit, the mosque was always full of people who wanted to see the Sultan. The maksura was then a restricted and exclusive space reserved for the Sultan. The representation of the Sultan as the mosque patron is also manifest in the annual Prophet Muhammad's birthday celebrations held by the Sultanate culminates. During the event, the Sultan walks from his palace to the mosque, accompanied by his brothers and soldiers. He also distributes coins as a symbol of blessings for his people. Standing in front of the mihrab, he softly affirms his generosity to his people, and more importantly, his ownership of the mosque and his legitimate position in front of his people. The fact that the inscriptions at Masjid Gede Kauman are written in Javanese and Arabic demonstrates the intention to incorporate the Javanese as the local culture and the imported Islam. The mosque and tomb complex is another example of how the patron is represented in Islamic architecture, as we find in tombs of sultans in other Muslim countries. This is Kota Gede Mosque and Tomb, where Panembahan Senopati, the well-known powerful sultan, is buried. Visitors have to dress in the traditional clothing with barefoot to enter the tomb. The strict regulations that are applied to visitors is an attempt to make the patron always present, even if he has been died and no longer in green. They have looked at how the traditional mosques have been sites of cultural negotiations and the representations of patrons. Now let's move forward to Masjid Istiqlal, the Indonesian State Mosque in Jakarta. Sukarno, who was in office from 1945 to 1966, the first president of Indonesia and the initiator of the project, clearly mentioned in his speech following the announcement of the project's completion that the mosque should express the nation's greatness. Thus, he asserted that the state mosque should not resemble the Maghrib mosque with the splendor of its timber structure. The state mosque had its own age. Thus, Sukarno said that a mosque made of concrete would best express modernity and the image of a modern nation. Sukarno's political agenda and negotiation of values were manifest not only in the use of the dome, but also in the mosque spatial arrangement. The mosque follows the Islamic orientation toward Mecca. Such an access not only helps worshippers direct their prayers, but also maximizes the use of space for prayer. Interestingly, the corridors surrounding the front courtyard are oriented toward the National Monument, which stands on Medan Merdeka Square to the southwest of Masjid Istiqlal. The National Monument was built by Sukarno from 1961 to 1975 to represent the nation's image as a great nation. The selected location of Medan Merdeka Square, which has significant historical meaning, and the spatial arrangement, which includes Masjid Istiqlal on the southeast side of the square and Medan Merdeka Square, embodies Sukarno's claim of public legitimation. The spatial layout resembles the spatial constellation that we find in traditional Indonesian cities, where the city square is located in the city center and is surrounded by the palace, the Sultanate State Mosque, and the market. Here, the National Monument, Masjid Istiqlal, and the Cathedral Church are all framed by palace and government offices to affirm their importance as a unity. The mosque as a political representation of the patron is clearly found in Masjid Amal Bakti Muslim Pancasila. This is a mosque prototype innovated by Suharto, the second president of Indonesia. The use of a pentagon framing the Arabic word God on the pinnacle of the mosque. As some of you may have known, the pentagon has been politically associated with Suharto's political party. This is clearly a demonstration of when a geometrical form is no longer neutral. The rise of Islamic radicalism and liberalism has ignited various reactions within the Muslim community. Islamic scholars have debated which kind of Islamic interpretation should be practiced in daily life in different countries. The contestation of literal vis liberal Islam was found widely in both Malaysia and Indonesia, the two most prominent Muslim countries in Southeast Asia. Islam Nusantara, or Islam of the Archipelago, was proposed as a negotiation between the radical Arab-oriented Islam and the locally Indonesia contextualized Islam. To some, Islam Nusantara was considered impure and was seen as a form of Islamic syncretism. At the national level, the idea of Islam Nusantara was confronted by Hizbut Tahrir Indonesia, one of the leading radical Islamic organizations in Indonesia, through textual contestation. While the return to locality might be seen as a negotiation of imported Islam in the local culture, the discourse of mosque architecture in Nusantara continues to advance. Following the healing discourse of Islam Nusantara, Masjid Tajuk Gede, which is in the picture here, was built in Purwakarta, Indonesia in 2017. The mosque was patronized by Dedi Mulyadi, the regent of the town, to reflect the concept of Islam Nusantara. The two-story building combines a three-tiered tajuk roof, which is borrowed from traditional Indonesian mosques, with arches, arabesque, and four minarets at the mosque corner, which are obvious imitations of the Middle Eastern Islamic tradition. The mosque has 9 drums, which called beduk, which are traditional instruments that one can find in most traditional Indonesian mosques. And these beduk are hit before the recitations of the calls to prayer. Dedi Mulyadi has expressed that these drums symbolize the Wali Songo, or the 9 saints who disseminated Islam on the island. There are obvious reminders of nationality and love for the Indonesian homeland in the prayer hall. The hall is covered with carpets. Clothes of red and white, which is the colors of Indonesian flags, are placed where worshippers prostrate and put their foreheads. In Islamic tradition, prostrating is an essential part of the prayer that shows one's submission and gratitude to God. Prostration is central in Islamic religious ritual to show humility and obedience. Prostrating on the red and white clothes can be seen as a submission to God, while showing one's love for Indonesia as their homeland. Inevitably, the discourse includes the roof style of the mosque. One group prefers the tajuk roof to the dome roof, as they believe it preserves the local Indonesian identity. Another group sees that the dome is essential to a mosque identity. So, I will conclude by summarizing that the Indonesian mosques have come to represent Muslim communities while also instigating cultural negotiations among these communities. Traditional mosques represented the Sultan as the holder of religious authority. The form of mosques and the architectural elements that they contain are embedded with meanings that can be appreciated by Muslim communities. Meanwhile, mosques built during the post-independence era were used by the state leaders to obtain international recognition for their countries, either as modern Islamic countries or modern countries that are mostly populated by Muslims.